Koreans began their long and rich history as small tribes entering Manchuria and the Korean peninsula from the Asian mainland hundreds of thousands of years ago. The vast plains of Manchuria, which now belong to China, has been the main area of activity for Koreans until 926, when the Korean kingdoms of Balhae fell to Khitan, Liao. At first, the Korean people came together into cluster villages, which is called walled town states. As stronger walled town states defeated weaker ones under their governance, these walled town states formed confederated kingdoms, including Old Joseon, Buyeon, Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla, as well as the Gaya Confederation. Among these, the kingdom of Goguryeo, Baekje, Silla developed into centralized kingdoms, opening the period of three kingdoms. When Silla unified two rival kingdoms in 676, or suddenly when Goryeo ended the period of the later three kingdoms in 936, Koreans finally came together into a single homogeneous nation that has kept its identity despite repeated invasions by surrounding countries and peoples. During the Goryeo and Joseon dynasties, Korea was an autonomous, unified state with a sophisticated central government for a millennium. When Japan took over the Joseon kingdom in 1910, Koreans lost their independence and came under Japanese colonial rule. Koreans tenaciously resisted pressure from the Japanese to destroy their way of life, and they succeeded in preserving their own culture intact. Since liberation from the Japanese in 1945, and as a result of the Cold War, Korea came to be divided into two states, North and South. Throughout their long history, Koreans have endured all kinds of trials to maintain an ethnic and cultural identity quite separate from that of China and Japan. Koreans all speak the same language and share the same culture, and clearly their language, alphabet, Hangul, arts, and costumes are distinct from those of the Chinese and the Japanese. Despite that it began as a small nation of Asian continent, Korea has had a long and important civilization. Korea's extensive history has been characterized both by the persistent assertion of a distinctive Korean identity and by military, political, and cultural doubts from the external sources. Korean historians noted that throughout its history, Korea has been invaded by foreign aggressors once every 2 years on average. While establishing its national identity, the Korean nation has produced remarkable cultural achievements. Recently, South Korea has excelled from the standpoint of political and economic development. South Korea is marked not only by a fully functioning modern democracy, but also by a high-tech modern world economy. The country has raised itself from the constant sufferings and poverty following the Korean War from 1950 to 1953 and get away with authoritarian rule to become a fully democratic nation committed to human rights, the rule of law, and economic prosperity for its people. The history of South Korea is also one of the fastest socioeconomic growth stories in the world during the past 8 decades. The country is now a leader in information technology, and its popular culture, known as Hallyu or Korean Wave, dominates much of Asia. South Korea's well-established democracy and internationally oriented, prospering economy has earned its recognition as the legitimate government on the Korean peninsula. As of July 2020, the Korean peninsula sustains a population of 51,780,579 compared to approximately 20 million at the end of the 19th century and 28 million in 1945 at the end of the World War II. Culturally and genetically, Koreans are one of the most homogeneous peoples in the world. Many branches of people in Manchuria and Mongolia are racially mixed with one another and culturally assimilated with the Chinese, but Koreans have succeeded in maintaining their own ethnic and cultural identity. Despite frequent cultural exchanges, Koreans have rarely intermarried with the Chinese. Koreans all share a sense of destiny and perception of themselves as a unique people, bound together by a common language, culture, and religion. The peninsula's geographical conditions enhance the feeling of uniqueness among Koreans and encouraged strong nationalism and a desire to resist foreign domination. Korean nationalism was strengthened because of successive foreign invasions. Korea, as a small country in a strategic location, has a deep sense of injustice about being manipulated by the great powers around it. For most Koreans, the notion of motherland and patriotism overrides virtually everything. Since they have to defend their motherlands as well as their own culture from the continent, Koreans have traditionally emphasized the importance of unity rather than diversity, to the point of sometimes antagonizing of others. That explains in part why Koreans are rather poor at mingling with outsiders and are angry when insolvent Korean enterprises are taken over by foreign capital. As a nation, Korea has a long history. The habitation of early man in the Korean peninsula started as early as 700,000 years ago. Some North Koreans claim that the peninsula may have been inhabited for a million years. Until now, Paleolithic remains dating about 700,000 to 8,000 years ago have been excavated in various parts of the Korean peninsula, from Tumen River Basin to the north of Jeju-do Island to the south. The most important Paleolithic sites are most found at the site of big rivers. The best known sites of the early Paleolithic age, which ended at about 100,000 years ago, include those at Sangwon County, in the Taedong River Basin, and Yongcheon County, in the Hantan River Basin, at Jecheon City, and Panyang City in the South Han River Basin, and at Paju County in the Imjin River Basin. The sites of the Middle Paleolithic age, dating about 100,000 to 40,000 years ago, including the following. The sites of the late Paleolithic age, dating about 40,000 to 8,000 years ago, including the following. It is presumed that Paleolithic men lived in virtually every part of the Korean peninsula. So Paleolithic stone tools such as choppers, scrapers, hand axes, and cleavers have been unearthed. Choppers and scrapers were mainly used to take animal meat off the bones. Hand axes and cleavers were later produced for many other purposes. In the Paleolithic age, the implements needed for hunting were fashioned by chipping stone. At first, a lump of rock, flintstone in particular, was struck until a usable tool with sharp edges or points was produced. This improvement in tool-making methods allowed access to a wide range and amount of food sources and was essential to the invention of bows and spear throwers. Bone implements made of animal bones and horns were also used for fishing. Paleolithic men at first lived in caves, and later they began to build dugouts on ground level. Instances of these are found at the Common Moru Cave and at the Cheonmal Cave, and the latter is illustrated by a dwelling site at Seokjangmi on hearth, together with animal figures of a bear, a dog, and a tortoise, radiocarbon dated to 20,000 years old, has been unearthed at Seokjangmi. The existence of a hearth demonstrates that fire was used both for heating and for cooking food. Paleolithic men were grouped together in small-scale societies such as bands and gained their subsistence for hunting wild animals as well as gathering fruits, berries, and edible plant fruits. They also gathered firewood and materials for their tools, clothes, and shelter. The invention of harpoons allowed fish to become part of human diet. At Sangwon County, many fossilized fauna remains from a diet of early humans have been discovered. By the late Paleolithic period, beginning about 40,000 years ago, Paleolithic people had begun to carve animal images on the walls of caves, demonstrating that their simple artistic activity. Whether these Paleolithic people were the ancestors of present-day Koreans is difficult to know. The Paleolithic age lasted for an extensive period. And presumably, upon experiencing a succession of glacier era, Paleolithic men periodically perished and were replaced by newcomers or survivors who migrated to other warmer areas. About 6000 BC, the tribes on the Korean peninsula began to pass from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic age. It is presumed that the late Paleolithic people on the Korean peninsula evolved into the early Neolithic people because when the Paleolithic evolved into the Neolithic age, the Korean peninsula experienced no rapid increase in population, and pottery found in some areas of Korean predated pottery discovered in Siberia and Mongolia. These original natives were supplemented by Neolithic newcomers who migrated from Siberia. Numerous sites of the Neolithic period have been found on the Korean peninsula, particularly along the Taedong River near Pyongyang and the Han River near Seoul. Neolithic men were characterized by their ability to make polished stone tools and to manufacture and use pottery. By polishing stone, they produced sharp knives, spears, and arrowheads. They also manufactured a range of stone tools for farming. The polished stone axe, above all other tools, made forest clearance feasible on a larger scale. As a result, Neolithic people were able to enjoy more convenience in their lives. Their greatest technical invention was the use of pottery. At first, they manufactured plain, rounded bottom pottery, and then from sometime around 4000 BC, a new type of pottery called 절문도기 appeared on the Korean peninsula and became characteristic of Korean's Neolithic age. Comb pattern pottery was gray in color with a V-shaped pointed bottom and was distinguished by designs on the entire outer surface of parallel lines that resembled marking made by a comb. The comb pattern design was added to prevent cracks on the surface. Mainly used to stone grains, this pottery has been found in numerous Neolithic sites throughout the Korean peninsula. Around 2000 BC, a third pottery culture spread into the Korean peninsula from Manchuria and was characterized by painted designs marked by waves, lightning, and skin on the outer surface on the flat bottom. Much of this newly introduced pottery has been found in the western and southern coastal regions and the river basins. An incipient farming culture appeared in which small-scale shifting cultivation was practiced in addition to various other subsistence strategies. These Neolithic people practiced agriculture in a settled communal life organized into familiar clans. They also domesticated and raised livestock such as dogs and pigs. They used nets to catch fish and learned to fish with hook and line. These Neolithic people turned animal skins to good accounts for clothing. They scraped away flesh for food with stone knives and then sewed skin together using bone needles made of deer horns. People later wove cloth for animal fur or plant fibers, especially hemp, with primitive spindles, and their clothes were often adorned with shells and beads. Once they begin farming, the growing needs to spend more time in labor tending crops require more localized dwellings, and so Neolithic men increasingly moved from the nomadic to sedentary existence. As a result, permanent or seasonally inhabited settlements appeared. Mainly living in a pit dwellings, they built huts in round or rectangular dugouts, with posts set up to support a straw, thatch covering to protect against the winds and the rain. The rough ground was covered by platforms, mats, and skins on which residents slept. One to several hearths were placed in the center of the floor of the dwelling and used for cooking and heating. Storage pits for storing grains and instruments were located beside the hearth or near the entrance, which faced south to benefit the sunlight. 5 to 6 family members inhabited the dwelling pits. The basic unit of Neolithic society was a clan, which was bound together by its distinct bloodline. Economically independent and self-sufficient, each clan formed its own village. Economic activities within territories claimed by other clans were prohibited, and such violations would incur either punishment or compensation. Despite this tight-knit economic life, exogamous marriage was common, and spouses were invariably sought from other clans. Neolithic society, in a word, was relatively simple and egalitarian. Neolithic clans held totemic beliefs in which they worshipped objects in the natural world, namely certain animals or plants, as their ancestors. In its worship of a specific totemic object with which it closest identified, a clan differentiated itself from others. Neolithic men also had animistic beliefs, as they were convinced that every object in the natural world possessed a soul. They therefore worshipped mountains, rivers, and trees. Foremost among natural objects to be worshipped was the sun, considered the greatest being in the universe, which they called Hananim or heavenly God. Was believed to be an immortal soul, which would ultimately return to heaven where God resided. So when a man died, he was said to return to the nature, and in burying the man's body, his corpse was laid with its head facing eastward in the direction of the sunrise. The cult of heaven and the spirits caused Neolithic men to look upon a shaman, who was believed to have the ability to link human beings with heavenly God and the spirits, as its greatest figure. Neolithic people believed that by virtue of his authority and on behalf of God, a shaman could drive off evil spirits and invoke good spirits so as to produce positive results. So it was these shamans who filled the roles of clan and tribal leader in the Neolithic and Bronze Ages. The Neolithic age is worthy of examination since men of this early period were the ancestors of present-day Koreans.